Good morning, Councillor Chan Singh Paga from Sandwell.
Councillor Mike Chalk from Redditch, a non-constituent authority.
Councillor Vera Waters, Walsall Council.
Lisa Trickett, Councillor, Birmingham City Council.
Councillor Cathy Bayton, Councillor from Dudley.
Lindsay Roberts, Scrutiny Officer for the Combined Authority.
Dan Essex, Government Services Manager.
Peter Fowler from Birmingham City Council.
Councillor Tony DeSico from Solihull.
Kate Taylor, Head of Finance Business Partner for the Combined Authority.
Laura Shubb, Interim Chief Executive of the Combined Authority.
And Andy Street there.
Thank you. We have on Teams attending this morning.
Hi, I think that's probably just me, Linda Horn, Finance Director, just here in case anything I can support with.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Do we have any declarations of interest under the Members' Codes of Conduct? Just to remind people, any gift of hospitality should be declared where the value was thought to have exceeded £25 in gifts or £40 in hospitality. No declarations of interest. And that brings us over then to the purpose of today's meeting, which is the first one of this municipal year. We have two Q&A sessions with the Mayor. This first one is policy, and the format will be that I will hand over to the Mayor, who will do a brief introduction. We will then move on to the questions. That will take us up to roughly 11:30, where we will then have a short comfort break, and the last half an hour of the meeting, which will be in private, we will then put our recommendations together. So over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just to say that, reflecting on the presence and points, I think we've got 6 of the metropolitan authorities represented in the room. So although we've got a relatively small number of people around the table, Cathy, we've got 6 of the authorities, which is a good starting point. So just a few words from me by way of introduction, then we'll get into the meat of it, which of course is the discussion. So first thing to say is, of course, thank you for this opportunity. I do see it as an important opportunity because in a sense it's early on in the mayoral term, it helps shape the policy that we're working through, and all these occasions in the past have actually been really, from my point of view, valuable and, dare I say it, even enjoyable. So thank you for the opportunity again. In terms of the highlights of what's going on at the moment and where I think, well, it's entirely up to you what you discussed, but where personally I think there may be value in the conversation, perhaps 4 things I'd just like to call out right at the beginning in terms of things that are really active on the CA agenda at the moment. And the first is, of course, this opportunity that we have to bid to government for very substantial devolved funds in the transport area. I know you've got a specific transport Q&A, but I think it would be sensible that we just explore some of the thinking behind that. It's a piece of jargon, I'm afraid, but they call it the CRSTS, the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. No one got any awards for branding when they designed that, I know, but it could actually be a really substantial piece of work for us. The bid has gone in, had to go in at the beginning of September. It is for £1.7 billion. It is for capital investments in transport. It's a multi-year settlement, and we're expecting to hear the outcome on budget day. It would be by a country mile the single biggest cash settlement we've ever had, and really importantly, I see it as a very big step around devolution, because although they are agreeing the broad content with us, we will then be using our internal processes to sign off the individual projects. It's been a great piece of collaborative work. Every one of the 7 authorities has contributed into it. And I mean, again, it's all been reported publicly. There are lots of really high profile pieces, whether it's the funding for the first VLR line in Coventry, whether it's the extension of the metro in Birmingham and the Black Country, whether it's more cycle routes. There's a lot of very good work. But the significance of it to me really is that government are saying we will invest considerably and we will trust your structures and processes. So it could be a really big step forward. The other main ask around CSR, and I'm sure this will take us into an area of conversation as well, and we've been very, very precise only to ask for one other major piece at this moment, and this is for a further brownfield land fund. I think our record on usage of the brownfield land funds that we've had so far is very positive, but we're looking particularly for a piece around commercial land fund because we've actually got a pretty decent sum around housing, and we're talking about our ability to assemble land, bring it back into use. It's 200 million. We will be lucky to get exactly that, but I am again optimistic that we're in a really good negotiating position with government there. And the reason why we have not given a long list of other requests, which has been the normal approach for the comprehensive spending review, is twofold. Number one, the government, I don't think at this CSR are going to do the George Osborne tactic of peppering little gifts around the country and making everyone feel good. The fiscal position is much, much more tight, but perhaps more positively, what we have done is we are negotiating into the levelling up white paper for a third devolution deal, and we will use that to then bring about a combination of powers and cash over a number of fronts. And again, there might be conversations around what we would want out of that. So that's the approach we've taken. To be really clear, that's not just my view, that was an agreed view of the board. So the leaders of all the councils, that's how we should play the negotiation with government. And if I'm honest, Chair, that's been quite a major piece in assembling all of those positions over the last few weeks and then getting collective agreement to that. Next thing I wanted just to touch upon, third thing I want to brief you on was our approach to economic recovery. Obviously, this is the major issue and frankly the major challenge, and you may want to quiz me on the numbers because we can see the employment position improving, but there are still incredible challenges, and we can go through the details numbers if you want. But in terms of how we accelerate the growth of the region, the piece of work that we're doing at the moment, again signed off the board, is a piece that we call Plan for Growth. It is basically an update post-pandemic, post WM 2041 and everything around net zero about where and how is the economy of the region going to grow at maximum speed. It's a piece that we're supported by an external consultancy, Ernst & Young. We're working well through it, and the idea is to identify the clusters, new areas of economic activity that have the highest potential for growth, and then obviously think about how we've got to support those clusters. It's a piece of work you'll be hearing a lot more about going forward, because I think it will be very much the sort of foundation of our economic recovery piece. And then the last piece I just wanted to update you on is what we call our corporate strategy. Now, again, this is being done in collaboration with all of our constituent and indeed non-constituent authorities, because this spells out what we're going to do and critically what we're not going to do, and then it has to make sure that our budget fits around that. And all of that will be going for final sign-off to the November board, with obviously the first run of next year's budget, which then is confirmed in February. And we've got, as you say, a second scrutiny session on that. But the critical point to draw out about this is we didn't want the budget in isolation. We wanted it right back into the corporate strategy, and that defines the sort of work plan over the next 3 years. So those are perhaps the 4 really big pieces of work: getting the bids in around CRSTS, thinking about approach to CSR and levelling up, then the plan for growth and the corporate strategy. And that's all I want to say by way of intro.
Thanks very much, Mayor. We've now been joined by Councillor Lumby, it's all right, and Councillor Kettle. So we are now quorate for this meeting.
You made the difference.
Can you repeat that, please?
We are quorate. Hooray!
I'm so not used to hearing.
I know. Okay, so the way we'd kind of set out some of our questions or discussions within the group were to kind of cluster them together so that we weren't all over the place. So we'll touch on mayoral powers, followed by economic development and regeneration, transport, housing and land, environment and well-being. Obviously quite a lot to cover and get through. So whether we get through all of those or not, we'll wait to see. So without further ado, I'm going to pick up on the mayoral powers and then that's over to Councillor Trickies.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Andy, and congratulations on your convincing win. Thankfully, we're now out of a political cycle, at least briefly.
Correct.
I suppose I'm actually really interested in what you touched on in terms of the powers and devolution, because I think what this committee's very much had an agreement with you that we don't have proper devolution in this region. And what I'm keen to understand is, one, if you've asked as part of levelling up for powers, what powers do you think you absolutely need? And I'm really interested in areas where over the last 4 years you would have acted, but you felt you hadn't got the powers.
Yeah. Fine. That's a really great question, actually, because I think lots will flow from it, actually. So the first thing to say is that I agree with what Councillor Trickett has said, that we have a rather immature model of devolution thus far. And I am hoping, indeed I'm optimistic about this, and of course, you'll all know this, levelling up was the word of Conservative Party conference, as it was the Labour Party conference, I suspect. And my argument is that devolution is the way to deliver levelling up. So I think it's absolutely, it's a big question, right moment to ask it. Now, I think there's 2 parts to the answer. First thing to say, there are some areas where we have got considerable devolved powers already, but we don't necessarily have the funding flows. Transport would be the best example of that. There is no question Transport for the West Midlands is the regional transport body. It has substantial powers already. But historically, for our capital investments, we've needed to go to central government and say, here's the business case for that, you support that. And we've actually put together a really good war chest by doing that. But the breakthrough on this city region sustainable transport settlement, the jargon I said earlier, is that actually the government are getting nearer to saying, here is a single pot. We're not going to specify the exact schemes. You will decide that locally. And that is actually a much more mature model of devolution. So I do think that could be a real breakthrough moment. But then the second part of the answer is there are other areas where we don't even have the powers at the moment. And let's just go through a few of these because these will be in, so straight answer your question, Lisa, these will be in what we've submitted for the Levelling Up white paper. And we've put lots of papers in to, worth just mentioning this name because you'll hear of him a lot, Neil O'Brien. He is Michael Gove's Minister for Levelling Up. And he was previously working in the Cabinet Office and sort of with his hand on the pen for the Levelling Up white paper. So we've been working directly with him, making submissions. And there are 3 critical areas that I hope will be in that white paper and we will see more powers. And the first is the whole area of skills. Now I need to be really clear here. We already have devolved powers around the adult education budget and we have some funding lines that have enabled us to do our work with FE colleges. But we do not have total control over the post-16 skills sector, and we are arguing that that is a critical next step in terms of the economic recovery. So that's the first area where we're asking for new clear powers. The second area, and again I'm sure there'll be lots of questions on this later on, is around net zero and what we can do to deliver carbon neutrality. And we're saying the regional body, and indeed in some cases local authorities, because there's double devolution to be thought about here, should actually be doing things that hitherto have been held just to government. And the best example of that is, of course, the retrofitting work, the Green Deal funding, which we know didn't work centrally. We're saying we can step into that as a regional coordinator. There's a block of stuff around net zero. And then the third area is around what I would call economic development tools. So, for example, we have no funding and no powers over trade and investment. Yes, we've set up our own growth company, we fund it locally, but we have nothing like Wales or Scotland do, where government formally devolve powers in those areas. So those 3 areas are 3 completely new pieces that we've asked for in that devolution deal proposal. Hope that's clear.
certainly of interest there, and I'm sure to some of my colleagues across the region, post-16 skills, clearly some responsibilities currently sit with local authorities. So I'd be interested to know if you've brokered powers coming up as well as down, because again, it's that seamless area. So I'd be interested in that point. And just to pick up on your powers point, one thing that I think is really important, and I think our slogan going all the time at Labour Party conference was stronger together. But one of the things that I think I found quite worrying, and again I was at a commission yesterday where Bristol and the South West and Leeds were held up, is how much we're not actually hearing. We're at risk of being squeezed between the north and the concerns of the southeast, and how we can better explore the vision and have a common view as to what works with this region. Now, maybe you can tell me the levelling up, but when I talk to civil servants, one of the things I hear, and I do actually talk to Conservative politicians nationally, what I kind of hear is at times the problem with this region is you're never too sure what's the priority, who's saying what. Are we clear that we are putting a common view forward?
Yes, my one-word answer is that, and that's why I stressed in my introductory remarks that all of the things that we had put into government and had asked for were not just me on my own, they were clearly agreed by the board. So, yes. And equally, different regions will do their own promotion, and good for them, frankly. But I am not taken by the fact that Leeds and Bristol somehow have told a better story than us. If you were to go and look at if you were to just look at some of the stuff that's been in the media recently, there's some brilliant examples where the West Midlands is held up as the exemplar. So I think everybody's putting their bit in. I think the general point, though, that your comment draws out, Lisa, is this. That it's been a very fractured, fragmented approach to this overall. And what my argument with government is, there needs to be a much more standard, clearly defined definition of what powers there are, and then everyone can get on with implementing them. And this sort of everyone dreaming up their own private negotiation is probably leading to something that you described there.
Okay, so I would concur with the fractured and fragmented approach, both from government, but equally the absolute importance, and it came out of the governance review here, of this region ensuring it's brokered between the leaders across the region, some commonality, because that was very clear that you can get that from Liverpool, you can get that from Manchester, you don't necessarily get it from this region. Can we just move on to your economy? I read the plan for growth with interest, and particularly given some of the comments and concerns of this committee, and given we're still growing at a rate much slower than other regions in the country. And I suppose when you talk about net zero and you talk about the timescales that we have to deliver in, you can't talk about growth without truly understanding how you arrest decline. You can't talk about growth unless you actually understand the timelines that you're operating in. So what do we need to be investing in now? Do we need, what is our opportunity for addressing both the social and the zero carbon? And for example, one of the things I banged on about is, we should be investing in building modular factories in this region, because actually we've got a massive housing need, but we're not putting forward those proposals. We seem to be adopting a very traditional growth first and we'll do inclusive later. And that really worries me, that unless we start to integrate the social, economic and environment within proper timescales, we are at risk. So it comes back, I suppose, to a long-standing issue for us. How do we actually ensure that the proposals going forward mean something to the mum in Dudley, mean something to the guy who's really worried that their van's not going to actually fulfil the clean air zone? Because at the moment, we're not offering them, the 1 in 12 who are self-employed, we're not offering them something for them to hook onto.
So there's so much in that. Let me just try to pull different bits out. First thing to say, because we do just have to get the facts right here, is it isn't true that we have been lagging in terms of growth. If you look at the big picture, pre-pandemic, the whole of the decade pre-pandemic, this region had the best growth of any region outside London. That's an established fact. Problem that we have, and I'll be entirely honest, is that the pandemic has affected this region worse economically than any other. And the trajectory line that we have coming out of the pandemic now predicts that we will have lower growth than other regions. So that is the big picture change that has occurred. And the reason for that is the composition of our economy between different sectors. So no one is denying the severity of the situation that we've got at the moment. And if we just let natural forces play out, we will grow slower than other places. In the whole of the previous 10 years, we grew considerably faster than other places. So the pandemic has been very damaging for us. Just on a technical point, Lisa, I'm slightly surprised you say you've read the plan for growth, because it hasn't even been published yet. So you are ahead of everybody by a mile. But there isn't a draft.
I sit on the Strategic Economic Board now.
So you've seen that, but it's only work in progress, so it hasn't really even concluded what's to be done yet, because it's got as far in the work as saying these are the areas of the economy that could grow faster, i.e. addressing what I've just described, of the trajectory looking really much weaker than it was before. So the work that will be done is to, over the next few weeks, and then will be shared very publicly, is which are the areas that are going to change that trajectory. And to your core point, Lisa, those areas have got to incorporate growth with delivering net zero, with delivering the right outcomes for those people who are most disadvantaged in the communities. The exam question here is not just how do we maximise growth, it is also how do we make sure that that the sectors we choose are the ones that are going to deliver net zero. And by the way, we're also in the exam question saying how do we get a geographical balance across the region? Because the other fact that is obvious coming out of the pandemic that's worth putting on the table is the recovery in Coventry and Solihull is much better than it is in Birmingham and the Black Country. Coventry economy is bouncing back very quickly, actually. So all of those questions are there in that piece. And if you want, sorry, Kathy, yeah. I'll just give you one perfect example of where this all comes together. So if you look at the clean manufacturing sector, that is now the fastest growing sector. That is what will help us deliver net zero. So then linking it to opportunities for young people in the most disadvantaged communities. If that's the fastest growing area, what skills do we have to put in place? And it's a small example, but it's a really good example of thinking. You then say electric vehicles are critical to the future. So you then work with your colleges to put on the programs of training people in the skills needed for the maintenance manufacture of those vehicles. And that's how the thing completes.
Thanks. Just on that one very brief point, I think what we have to do though is be really honest about the risks as well. So I absolutely, I'm totally supportive of clean manufacturing. I'm really keen to see the shift to electric, but I also know there's 40% less parts in an electric car. And what we have to understand is what that does for the supply chain in West Brom.
Yeah.
And to me, those are some of the big issues that can be quite boring at times to actually map out, but actually we've got to get underneath.
No, it's a fundamental issue. So the region's got huge strength. And this, when I say why, is the trajectory now much weaker than it was just 2 years ago. This is a sector which has gone from being a hero in the 2010s to a huge risk in the 2020s. And you all know the story of GKN in Erdington, which was a successful plant, but now faces potential closure. And it is simply a harbinger of the change that is coming in that sector. So we are trying to work with the government through what they call the Advanced Propulsion Centre at looking at how the transformation of that centre, that whole sector, will be a positive one for us rather than risk losing literally tens of thousands of jobs if we get it wrong. So it's a very good example of the challenge that we face.
Thanks for that comprehensive answer, Andy. I'm going to move over to Tony now because I think that picks up very nicely and he's a good intro for the lines of questioning Tony had got for you.
Morning, Andy.
Good morning.
Good to see you. Obviously, the region faces a number of challenges. You've already sort of gone through some of those. Manufacturing is a key area for this region, and you know we're all very proud of our manufacturing history, and we want to make sure that that tradition goes forwards, and we're a manufacturing centre for many years to come. So, what are your plans to address some of the challenges we are facing in the manufacturing centre? You've gone through some of them with the changes with EVs and so on, but there are other changes as well, some structural changes. How do you, as Mayor of the Combined Authority, plan to address those?
Yeah, great question. So I think the first thing is manufacturing is a huge overall title, but it needs to be broken down into some of its component parts. Is the first thing we're doing. So the first thing we're trying to do is find the real success stories within manufacturing. And I'll give you a very good example of this. The whole question of medical device manufacturing. The reason I call that out is because we have got a huge advantage, and so we are specifically looking to support that sector or subsector, you might call it, with networks to try to draw in new companies. And of course, that then comes to the land that you're putting there available, the sort of cluster of available skills, and we're seeing real success there with the Life Sciences Park in Selly Oak, and indeed the first tenants on the Longbridge redevelopment will be in that sector as well. Now, I just draw that out as a specific example because what we've got to do is get below the headlines to say which components are there. The next one is, of course, the whole electric vehicle sector, as we've already said. And again, we have seen real success in this sector. Again, it's mostly around Coventry, but with Lotus, with LEVC, obviously with JLR itself, and then with Norton. And the way we support all of that is all of those investments being supported through the growth company. And so they are out in the market actively looking for those inward investments in those subsectors where we've got a relative strength. The next area I should probably just go on until the end of the session on this, and I shouldn't. The next area we should mention on here is the whole question of the energy efficiency, which we designed all of this work 6 months ago. We did not know how prevalent this question was going to be when we did it. So a critical piece of work is looking to decarbonise and make more efficient the energy requirements of the Black Country SME, largely automotive supply chain. So a critical piece of work there, and it links to another piece of work I know Councillor Trigger is a great believer in, and that's the whole question of the energy innovation zones, where actually they are moving away from just something on paper to something real. If you go to Tyseley now, you can see a number of startups there around that sector as well, and they will help. And then the fourth area of work that I would call out is the skills development. So some of the skills programs that we are either running and funding directly or encouraging through our colleges are to give exactly the skilled engineers that those sectors require. And our role there, as much as anything, is a sort of what's called an arbiter. So we would be working with the colleges to ensure what they need of the future. So there's a number of things where we can either act directly through one of our agencies like the Growth Company or through our partners like the colleges. Hope that answers.
It does, thank you. That's quite a comprehensive answer. One sector you didn't actually mention there is shipbuilding. And I saw on Midlands Today last night, and I didn't know this, to be honest, we are actually quite a centre for shipbuilding in the West Midlands. And I think it's a company in Hales Owen is actually making components for shipbuilding. And they're asking the government for a subsidy, I think of around about £1 billion, so that they can compete with our European competitors and more globally. So do you know anything about that? And are you working with those companies to actually, or will you work with those companies to actually get some of that money into the West Midlands?
I did not know that we were a centre of shipbuilding, and in all of our research, it's never popped up. But it doesn't surprise, and there is an obvious surprise in that. But it comes to a broader point. Let's take aerospace manufacture. We are a huge player in that. Even though, if you ask most people on the street where aeroplanes are made, they would probably say North Wales, Bristol. Yeah. But actually, it comes to the strength of the supply chain. And so what we are doing in that sector is working with, again, the trade body that is there on what could be done, particularly around skills, what could be done around defence contracts as well. So we work with those trade bodies. Straight answer to your question, we've not been drawn into the shipbuilding supply chain, and I did not know of the strength of it.
Well, neither did I till last night, but I found that a very interesting article. And coming from Warsaw originally, I used to live next to Wee-Way Watson, who used to make chains. They used to make chains. I think they actually made the chains for the Titanic, the anchor. And that is a tradition that's gone back hundreds of years. And it's something I think could be a growth industry for the West Midlands going forwards.
Well, there is a very interesting point here about where growth comes in this. And one of the pieces of work, which is at the moment is more at an academic stage than a real stage, and is this whole question of reshoring. Now, we won't get into the pros and cons of Brexit, and I tend to get in trouble when I start talking about that, so we'll be quiet about that. But whatever you thought about Brexit, there is an opportunity now around reshoring, because and the supply chain difficulties that not just our manufacturers actually, all sorts of companies are experiencing, are leading them to say there is a premium on made locally. So we are, again, in terms of the work of our growth hubs, a growth company, looking to see where again we can encourage reshoring. So you are on something big.
And I think that was the reason for this £1 billion sort of investment that the industry was looking to get. It was to reshore some of the work that had been lost. And I think that is a key thing going forwards. And whatever your people's views on Brexit, it does give an opportunity to do that.
And that will be in part of the plan for growth. Actually, it's saying how can you stretch some of these supply chains.
Okay, thank you for that, Andy. That's heartening to hear that you will be looking to how we can support our shipbuilding industry in the West Midlands.
For the canals.
Yeah,
Canals, yeah.
canals. Yeah, we've got plenty of canals, more than plenty. Skills shortages in training. You've mentioned that, and one of the things in the economy at the moment, I've read a lot of articles about the fact there's lots of vacancies, but they're not the right type of vacancies for people to fill. That we don't have the skills for people to fill some of the vacancies that are out there at the moment. So I think that's an important area. You've mentioned some of that and how you can help. But that disjoint between what people, what manufacturers and companies want and what's available, we need to gap. How are you going to do that?
Okay, this is a really important question, Tony. Thank you. And again, it's time for honesty about this. I'll just give you the stats because I think you'll all find them quite remarkable, actually. So vacancies currently in the WMC area, CA area, are 170,000. That is 40% up on the pre-pandemic days. So there are lots of jobs there. But the claimant count has, I'll just give you these stats as well, because you see the full picture and then you'll see the challenge that your question draws out. Claimants went up by 83,000 during the pandemic, and they've gone down by 25, so you can all do the maths. So we still have many more people on benefit than before, even though vacancies are 40% up. So the real question is what on earth is happening that the mechanisms that were working reasonably well before are not working as well now. So we've tried to really understand this, and there's, I think, three things about it. The first is exactly what you're talking about. There is an imbalance of skills, no question about it, and we'll come back to what we do about that. And it isn't just that. The second thing is that attitudes to work have changed to some extent. So there were vacancies in the hospitality sector before, which were filled. People are now choosing not to come forward for them. That is not a skill issue. That's around pay and this whole debate about whether pay rates have got to rise. It's around antisocial hours, all of that. And the third issue is definitely right, is that the DWP, who have responsibility for sort of matching the two here, they have not been functioning as well as they should have been through the pandemic. So, for example, face-to-face interviews with young claimants have not been happening until recently, and they know they have got to get that mechanism back. So there's some fairly deep stuff, but let's just get to the skills piece, because this again comes straight back to the devolution question that Lisa asked us. I'm saying to ministers at the moment, literally, we just gave a submission to the new skills minister only yesterday, that where we have had the cash, we have used it really well to train people for the skills of the future. I'll give you the best example of this is in the digital sector. We've done the digital boot camps. They've now been rolled out across the country. They were pioneered here. We have spent all the money that we had available on it. We cannot commission anymore. The employment rate after those is over 75%. They're demonstrably successful, but we can't commission more because we spent up. It's the same in the area of construction, where obviously we're taking perhaps more challenged people in construction, but the employment rate is over 50% there, and we're now doing that in healthcare, for example, as well. So all of our sector-based work academies with our colleges are all around these technical skills. So our argument, and it comes back to the devolution deal, is that actually of that huge sum of money that the government put aside for retraining, and you may remember it there now, it's £3.5 billion, very little of that has actually come forward to the front line in areas like this. And our argument is that that needs to move quickly because we can do it. And who knows what will happen as a result of this. But today, the skills minister is with us looking at the HGV training that we provided. Because 6 months ago, we saw the gap in the market that was coming and we stepped into it to provide HGV training with a provider in the Black Country. And you know, what could be a better example of us trying to step into something which has become a national issue? We do need the resources, and that's why it goes back to that apparently quite dry conversation about devolution of powers and cash.
Thank you for that, and Andy, that's good to hear that we try to anticipate some of the gaps in the skills economy that we're going to face so that we can address them in good time. And the final question I want to ask is around about employment opportunities for young people.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned a lot of things you're doing around skills, but what specifically are you doing to help people, young people, getting to work, perhaps their first jobs?
Well, I don't want to overclaim here because the major national programme has been kickstarted, actually, and we decided that one of the things we could do was really get behind Kickstart. The numbers, again, I think I'm going to be very blunt and honest about this because it tells us again something that's not happening. The numbers, 12,000 Kickstart vacancies across the West Midlands, 7,000 have been filled. So there's 5,000 unfilled Kickstart vacancies today. Our aim in our plan for jobs that we did in the campaign was 20,000. So we are short, but the single biggest issue currently is not finding employers to come forward. It's actually convincing young people that they should move into something that I would probably describe as a no-lose offer. You're fully paid and you get that early qualification. And this is why there's something really deep going on about attitudes and indeed about DWP perhaps not being able through face-to-face to encourage people into those opportunities. So our job is to really promote this, encourage it from employers who are in a position where we have a large surplus of roles. So it's fascinating, isn't it, that that's happening?
Can I just come back on that one?
Yeah,
because I share many people's pain with Kickstart and huge number of the third sector of holding Kickstart vacancies and some really exciting ones in media, marketing, gardening, you name it, there's huge opportunities. But the sheer frustration of DWP not bringing through people, not engaging with young people in a way that actually makes it feel that it's something they want to do. Which brings me back to national programmes do not necessarily respond to your local area. So as part of your devolution deal, will you be asking for Kickstart to actually be devolved to you?
No, because the government have made it really clear that that is a time-bounded scheme. But so there will be nothing to devolve from next March. However, we will be asking for the devolution of other schemes that will do that, because that's a piece. And obviously, the critical issue is apprenticeships as well. Now, as you probably all know, we've had our local scheme, the Apprenticeship Levy Transfer Fund, which continues to work well, over £30 million going in, and we are at last beginning to see a turnaround in the apprenticeship start numbers. The last couple of months are much better. And of course, we're also asking for funding to be devolved for the skills training, specifically for the new career opportunities as we talked about. So the general answer to your question is yes, Lisa, but the specific around Kickstart is no.
Tony, do you want to finish?
I'll just finish off. I think I just wanted to make one comment. I think that's important. I think these government initiatives, you know, they come from the right place, but it's all about delivery, and sometimes the delivery is not what it should be. So what we can do as a combined authority is help that.
That is spot on. So our key argument with ministers is that we collectively have built a capability to deliver here, and frankly, they should be using it. And that capability, by the way, is not just the combined authority, it's all the local authorities, because as Lisa drew out, they have a responsibility as well. It is, of course, all of our colleges who've come together in a unique partnership, and of course, it's our independent training providers. And that's all glued together with things like the youth hub, the youth platform that we've put in place. So I'm saying to them, look, examine the results we have achieved where we've had the resources, get that on steroids across the region. But the capability point is critical.
Yeah, thank you for that, Andy. I look forward to seeing some initiatives from the combined authority on that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is that Peter, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andy. It was just actually on the Kickstart, and I'd actually written down, actually just before you'd actually said it, and that was the LA's partners, government and the combined authority on Kickstart. You mentioned that was 7,000 vacancies that still need filling.
I still need filling.
I beg your pardon, 5,000. Yes, you know, I did say 5. Yeah. I'm just wondering what other measures that you feel that could help a combination of all these people to encourage our young people to come on board with Kickstart. Thank you.
I really do think the single most important thing that could happen, and I've been putting this to the Secretary of State last Wednesday over breakfast in Manchester, was to get the DWP work coaches to promote this. Because what's been said is right. If you just look at the range of Kickstart vacancies there are on offer at the moment, it is vast. It is everything from gardening through to nuclear science, probably, literature, but it is incredibly exciting when one looks at those offers, as I have done. And the role of the work coach, how the system's supposed to work, is to sit down with an individual and say, that's the thing that matches for you. And I genuinely think, remember that whole work coach idea was born here in Birmingham about 6-7 years ago, and then became the national standard. And that's what's got to happen, Peter. That's my debate with them, really.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Akhtar, I'm going to come to you now. You've got a question around the battery gigafactory.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andy. You may be aware that a planning application to build a gigafactory have been submitted by the Rigby Group and the Coventry City Council.
Correct.
To build a gigafactory at Coventry Airport. However, there is still no sign of any commitment by the government that this factory will be built at Coventry. I would like to ask what conversation you have had with the minister, and what assurances have been given to you that this factory will be built at Coventry, which will no doubt will actually help the local and the regional economy. Thank you.
So another critical question. So let's just be clear, there is no doubt that this is a hugely significant potential investment, because back to the starting point about regional economy, this is an area of battery technology where we can lead, but we need a gigafactory to do it. So the straight answer to your question is there have been lots of conversations between me and government ministers about this, and the government are absolutely ready and waiting to play their part. But they cannot, this is the tough bit, they cannot guarantee it, because the government are not going to build this. The people who are actually going to build it are a private sector supplier to the ultimate car manufacturers. And although JLR don't like us saying this publicly, the truth is, of course, that JLR will be likely to be the major customer. So where we are in the conversation at the moment is we're now down to a relatively small number of potential operators of that site who would then supply the manufacturers. When the operator is chosen, the government will then enter into negotiations as to what level of subsidy they will provide for it. Every gigafactory in the world is subsidised by the host government, maybe apart from Tesla in the US. And the British government have been very clear and are on the record of saying they will stand ready to do that as well. But they have to have the private operator to negotiate with. So it is not them being slow. They are ready, waiting to go. Every time I see the Secretary of State for Business, he says, are we any further on with this? And we're just waiting for that moment, really. And just to give you final reassurance on it, if you look what happened with the Nissan factory in Sunderland, it's a much smaller factory than the one proposed in Coventry, but it was exactly the same. The government came into the negotiation and agreed a subsidy, which is not public knowledge how much it was, but it was a substantial sum of money. But they had to do it with the private operators. And we have been waiting for that private operator. Is that clear?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Can I just ask a supplementary on that then? So you're saying we're waiting for the private operator?
Yeah.
What's the hold up? Is it a tendering process? Is it that there isn't, you know, what's the hold up with it, and what can the CA do to expedite that and move it along?
It isn't really a hold up, Kathy. It's, sorry, Madam Chair, I'm being disrespectful, sorry. It isn't really a hold up. It's just the process that the particular customer has to go through in terms of specifying what they would wish to be purchasing, and then the potential suppliers respond to that. So what can the CA do? Not a lot, because this is a private sector process, but what I think we have already done, because I chair the group with Coventry City Council, with the Rigby Group, with Coventry Warwickshire LEP, that make sure all of this is sort of marching along in tandem. And so, as the councillor said, to actually put in the planning application in outline before we've got the detail of the operator was, for example, a good move to try to accelerate this. But I promise you, lots of people have looked at this timeline, and we have to wait for the private customer and supplier.
Thank you. Councillor Padder.
Thank you, Madam. I guess I used to work for Jaguar Land Rover, so I know the just-in-time issue that we're having at the moment. Would 1 gigafactory be sufficient for the region, or will there be more than one?
Very interesting question. The current predictions are that there will need to be, for the UK as a whole, about 7. But that will come over time, and it, of course, depends on the use of batteries in the whole of the economy. So we can all see it's going to be used in cars, but the really interesting question is how much of this will be used for domestic energy storage, for example, because that's when it gets really big. So the critical thing is to get one right at the beginning of this process. And frankly, I'm not worried that Nissan are going to have theirs slightly before, because there's definitely room for more than one. But to begin at the beginning, so we become the centre of this whole industry. And on that, it's really encouraging, because where is the research and development being done? Largely at Warwick Manufacturing Group. Where is the sort of whole question of other elements of the electric vehicle technology work being done around that whole sort of Coventry ecosystem? So whether it be in Mayoral in Nuneaton, or whether it be at LEDC, or whether it be at Lotus, all of these things are coming together, and they all perform that total cluster. But we need one early gigafactory as the centre point of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We had one last question on this about energy.
Yes.
And you did allude to
Yes,
energy innovation zones.
Yes,
Can you just elaborate on that and explain exactly what your role and responsibility around that is, and what an energy innovation zone is, please?
With pleasure. So a again, let's link back to the very first question that Councillor Trickett asked. We feel that the CA and indeed LAs could have a much bigger role here, actually. So energy policy at the moment in the UK is pretty much completely centrally operated. And our argument, and we put this into the white paper again, is that there should be an energy element of the devolution deal as well. Now, let's just be clear, there's a number of pieces of this. There's one bit around retrofit, and I think we all get that pretty clearly. There's another bit around making the region's use of energy more efficient going forward. And we will need to invest in new technology around that. So we're asking in that we actually get a line of funding for that. And we're proposing that some of the cash or tax that you pay on your energy bills at the moment is retained in the region. So that would be a bit of a breakthrough. Again, you'd be interested to know Scotland gets that. So if you pay an energy bill in Scotland, some of it's held in Scotland, and then they're able to develop their sort of energy system locally. No English region has that. We are asking for that. I do not know if we will get it. Meanwhile, we've tried to get on with some things that we can do. And the energy innovation zones were set up by what they call Energy Capital, which is a sort of arm's length body of the CA. And the idea of them is that across 5 locations across the West Midlands, the best developed is Tyseley though, so let's talk about that. And to be honest, the one at Tyseley comes off the back of what BCC did some years ago with their waste centre at Tyseley. But it tries to concentrate in one place against the same idea as we just talked about Coventry and the electric stuff, a sort of cluster of new businesses looking at what we can do to improve energy distribution, storage, use. So you go there at the moment, you see lots of startups who are looking at these business opportunities in this sector. And it's a similar idea, like similar companies like to be co-located, like to have that expertise. And the critical thing at the Birmingham one is that the university are now an anchor tenant. So we're going with the sort of academic breakthroughs that they're using as well. Hopefully that explains the thinking.
Peter?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Andy. Pleased to say that as the environmental champion for the combined authority, that with Councillor Court, we're actually hopefully that our next board meeting will be at the Tyseley plant, because we did talk and say it would be great, because they did say, why don't you come and have a board meeting and see it? So we're going to see that site, and so pleased to see how energy on electric and others is moving forward, and certainly with the innovation zone. When we're talking of the gigafactory, no expert am I, but I think if I'm right, Chairman, is that within the batteries it's lithium.
Yes.
And I'm hearing that at the moment, and I'm hearing obviously with lithium and the demand on that I can see then the price rising. And I think you just answered the question or alluded to it, and that is I'm looking at lithium now, but expand on the replacement of lithium for the future.
Thank you. Just as the shipbuilding question was out of my comfort zone, the chemistry of batteries is out of my comfort zone as well. But I don't know the chemistry of it. I'm not going to pretend to, but I do know this. That part of this whole cluster argument is having the R&D. So what we have already got in Coventry is the National Battery Industrialization Centre. That was a competition that was won in 2017. It was a must win. And if the whole purpose of that centre is to look at the whole new technologies around battery. So they do have their current line, their line of prototype assembly, and then they will be looking at new, whether it be solid state pieces or new replacements for lithium. But the key point is we have an asset in the region that is looking at exactly that, and that's why I'm confident we can lead in this technology.
Thank you, Andy.
Tony, quick supplementary.
Yeah, just a quick one. We don't move too far away from lithium because we've got an advantage in this country because we've got quite good stores in Cornwall, I believe.
Yeah.
So that could give us an economic advantage.
Absolutely right. And given the expense, being able to transport is important. You are right.
Exactly. But another question we're going to have, we've seen shortages around chips.
Yeah.
And we haven't really got a chip manufacturer, I don't think, in this country. That seems to be a major shortfall for a manufacturing country like the UK. We should be looking to have our own chip manufacturer here rather than have to import chips from China or elsewhere.
Yeah.
do you have any plans to try and entice anybody to come and relocate to the West Midlands?
Not yet, but you're right. But did you hear Intel's statement on this as the world's biggest chip manufacturer? Why they were ruling out the UK as their next location?
Would that be the B word?
Was the B word. So there we have it.
Okay.
I mean, we talk about an opportunity from the B word, the reshoring, but there are also challenges from it.
Yeah.
There we have the world's biggest chip manufacturer being really clear. We're not coming to Britain because you can't supply the rest of the European market.
I think we used to have a chip manufacturer, but I think we sold it to the Chinese.
Japanese, actually.
Japanese, was it?
Yeah.
Which, you know, to be honest, it doesn't smack to me as a joined up economic policy, if I'm honest.
But no, the straight answer question is no, we do not have a plan around that at this moment. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Interesting. I'm going to move on to some transport-related questions
Take
now.
me back from chemistry, please. It's always rubbish at chemistry.
Well, I hope these will be a whole heap easier for you. We're going to move on to some transport-related questions. Obviously, we have the Transport Scrutiny Committee has its own Q&A with Councillor Ward as the policy, as the lead member for that. So these are the more kind of strategic, high-level questions for yourself. So I'm going to start off, first of all, with Councillor Kettle.
The override question concerning transport has been alluded to in several of the conversations, and the effects of mobility on and labour mobility on the economy. It isn't all about convenience. It's about really the deflationary effects of congestion within our road system across the whole of the CA area. And from my own experience, it took us something like 40 minutes to get to the motorway from Dudley to go and see some eco houses last year. And we all know that there are bottlenecks around the area. And we've got 6 prime sites in Dudley to look at quite seriously. But the question is, and you've already alluded to the numbers. The numbers where transport is concerned are considerable. You know, you're talking about on passenger transport, 327 million journeys last year. It's horrendous. And that's not only horrendous or tremendous, whichever way you want to look at it.
Both.
But you can, yes, but you can say that's only about 10% of actual journeys. So the pinch points and the effects on the economy are considerable. And what we wanted to allude to was having a serious focus on the mobility issue that is affecting the economy and its deflationary effects that it does have.
Yeah, on congestion. No, it's a great overall question, Ian. So this too has been changed by the pandemic. And again, we need to be really honest. Pre-pandemic, of course, there was congestion. No one's debating that. But actually, we were moving in the right direction in terms of people moving to public transport. And I think you've seen all the data before about the ridership numbers in 2019 for tram, train, bus. They were all going the right way. And actually, a wonderful stat. If you look at the share of journeys into central Birmingham, the biggest place of work in the region, being taken by car, it was falling rapidly. So we were definitely making progress. The big picture, though, is that the recovery is a car-borne recovery at the moment. So I'll just give you 2 stats that will prove this. Vehicles on the road, 100% of pandemic levels. People on the train, last week, 57% of pre-pandemic levels. So we have collectively got a much more difficult situation. Now, my attitude to this is that we've got to continue to play for the long term here. And I genuinely think we can get back to that positive progress if we do 3 things. Number 1, continue to invest lots of capital in improving our transport system. And you can ask me questions about that. As I said, we've got big bids in, we've already got a lot in place. Number 2, continue to make public transport reliable, frequent and clean. And so one of the things I think actually the CA has done well with our partners, we've kept public transport running to a good standard through the pandemic and through the recovery, so it is there and available. And just little things Like West Midlands trains are now under absolute instruction that every one of their trains has to be many carriages. So on the Snow line, it must be 5, across city, it must be 6. It just builds confidence. And of course, we've had the bus fare reduction as well, which is helpful. And then the third thing we've got to do is win the sort of PR battle that says public transport is safe, because we've still got this slight underlying narrative that tells you you can be in a squash theatre and it's fine, but as soon as you go home on the train, it's not fine. And I mean, that's a nonsense, isn't it? So actually, there is a lot to do to get the attitudinal piece right around this, but long term, it's back to investing large sums of money to improve our network. And by the way, in the right place, that does include roads as well. So some of the key road pinch points like junction 6 of the M42, junction 10 of the M6, we continue to spend large sums on that. The core city centres, the read my lips moment is it has got to be a public transport recovery, and I genuinely think we are well placed to do that. That's my overview on it.
Secondly, we're not talking peanuts here. The deflationary effects on mobility. They put a figure of 2.3 billion on it. Billion, not million.
No, the cost of congestion are huge.
We're talking fancy figures.
Yes.
And unless we iron out as many of the pinch points as we can, so that mobility can flow and we can reduce this figure, it does affect everything.
I totally agree.
Fundamentally, deflation is the word, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a huge economic cost, and so that's why we've tried to identify the really most serious pinch points. I gave you 2. The next one would be virtually Island. So again, it was in the middle of the pandemic, so we didn't get much news around it. But the fact we finally got the cash in hand to do that, which is how long have we been talking about Virtually Island?
26 million.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some of these key pinch points do have to be dealt with. And actually, again, without going through all the detail of it, in this bid into government, currently there is a good blend between active travel. We've got about 200 million around active travel, 18 more segregated cycle lanes, but at the same time continuing to pull out some of the worst traffic congestion points for exactly the reason you're drawing out. So it has to be a coordinated plan.
Thanks for that, Andy. I mean, I think I'd like to expand that just a little bit further when we talk about the house building plans, in the Black Country Plan, for example.
Yes.
And I won't be specific about sites or anything else, but obviously if you are building the plan to build so many thousands more homes, the road infrastructure and the public transport network, you cannot do one without having absolute an eye on the other, because the road systems just won't cope. So you've referred to and you're going to have to remind me of what the acronym stood for, the CRSTS.
City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. I am sorry, it's such a mouthful.
That's the one. So, I mean, are you hopeful that that pot of money will give the capacity to have that developmental eye rather than just resolving the pinch points that we've got? Because we have to think about the development for the future. So are you looking to that pot of money to be able to pick up some of that?
Let's be clear, even if we got everything we bid for, £1.7 billion, it's not everything everyone would want, but it does, I believe, it is substantially more than we've had before, and I do believe it both deals with some of the really urgent problem issues, and it has a lot of development funding as well. So the most high-profile piece that's been talked in the media about that is the tram extension along the Hagley Road, and if we can get that to the Dudley boundary and really producing a really good quality public transport link to Halesowen, that would be something incredibly good developmentally. So yes, it's a one-word answer.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. How far out will this come? We've got 2,500 properties being built between ourselves and Bromsgrove. There's a major junction there, which the developer is proposing to do some rather stupid ideas with, I think most of us would say. Would that 1.7 billion come out in our direction to help us develop that?
No.
No. Okay, fair enough.
But let's just be clear though, yes and no. It will not fund road schemes in Worcestershire, to be really clear. But it will fund some public transport schemes that citizens of non-constituent authorities rely on. Very clear. But no, the road funding for the county areas is separate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that clarity. Now, I've got a couple of questions from Councillor Clements, who's unable to join us today due to family circumstances, but if I could put them to you, I may not be able to elaborate on them to the full extent Liz would have done. But for the Sustainable Transport Settlement Fund, will the Sustainable Transport Settlement Fund meet the ambition of the transport network?
So, sort of what I was saying, right, very first throwaway line in the last question. It will not do everything everybody wants. It really won't. But it will be a huge step forward. And again, let's just remember what we're talking about here. We are talking about decades of underinvestment in our public transport. You know, we did all this data before, looked at our comparison with London, and we were hopelessly underinvested in. We're catching up. But no, the straight answer is there'll still be a list of ambitions that people want to achieve, which will not be funded. But it certainly is a damn sight good way through the next priorities.
Thank you. And Lizzie's second question is around bus franchising.
Yes.
And to pick up what your current position is on the future of bus franchising.
Okay. So that's a very straightforward question, but I'm just going to say one or two other things because I think there's an important point behind it. The current CA position, so again, board agreed position, is we are doing a piece of work led by the executive, looking at the pros and cons of bus franchising, and that will come back to a later board. I can't actually remember which board it is, Laura, you might want to tell me. But so we have not judged whether it should or should not be done, but we've done what I think is the intelligent piece to say, let's look at all of the issues here. In the meantime, what we have to do is continue to work through our enhanced partnership, which I think anyone would say is as good as anything in the country in terms of partnerships to improve the current service. And we have to submit to government a proposal that's called the Bus Service Improvement Plan. All mayoral areas have to do it, to talk about how after the end of their subsidy, because they have been subsidising it hugely through the pandemic, that we will be able to maintain services as broadly as they currently are. We will be able to improve bus priority routes, we'll be able to improve ticketing. So a plan for the enhancement of bus services is being put to government, and we will be seeking substantial funding, roughly about 250 million, in support of that.
So in terms of you being the mayor of the CA, will your position be the same position as the board's, or do you have a different position?
So I think the truthful answer is, of course, we're waiting for this set of facts to come from the executive, and we'd all, I think, perhaps be rash to declare a final position till we've seen that. But I'll tell you what my instinctive position is, and I shared this a lot on the campaign trail actually. I do not believe that we will move to franchising, because I believe this paper will say that the cost of it to the CA actually will be prohibitive. Actually, we already get a lot of the benefits of franchising from the work with National Express. And we're in a very different position to Greater Manchester, for example, where they're likely to go for it, because we have one dominant operator who does run a pretty integrated service, and we can negotiate with them on what we want. The situation in Manchester is all sorts of fragmented operators and very little coordination, therefore. So I am naturally more sceptical about it, but to be fair, I'm waiting for the expert paper to come forward.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Vera Waters who wants to make a comment.
Hi Andy, I don't drive, so I use public transport every day of the week to wherever I'm going, and I've got to say National Express services are absolutely diabolical. They have actually now reduced some of the main services, which means the buses are packed. You're ending up with two buses coming together on the main routes. And I actually do think a franchise, and I mean, you've got diamond buses And Diamond buses run an absolutely superb service. They're doing what they're doing around the West Midlands. They are really good compared to National Express. I've written numerous emails off to National Express, and I've actually received what I would call lip service. They have not taken on board anything that I have actually said. Another question I'd like to ask you, Andy, is you mentioned that they was actually subsidised. Are they actually still receiving that subsidy, or have they finished now?
So let's just be clear about this. There's two types of subsidy. There is there's an ongoing subsidy happened pre-pandemic for the routes that are not commercial. And we, through TFWM, pay that subsidy. So yes, that is ongoing. The second type of subsidy is since the beginning of the pandemic, all operators have been subsidised because their ridership is obviously well down. Latest numbers on bus ridership, by the way, is about 78%. So you can see the gap in their fare box. And yes, that is continuing. And government have said it will continue till March. And so this question about what happens after March to sustain the services, hence this bus service improvement plan grant application, is really critical because that's where the crunch point will come.
Okay, I've got Councillor Trickett followed by Councillor Akhtar.
Thank you. I'm quite intrigued that you see the provision of a private monopoly is the way to actually get the best deal for the citizens of our region.
Well, it's not a monopoly, is the first thing to say, is it? And it has got a huge amount of public subsidy in it as well, as we've just discussed. So it's not a classic private monopoly situation by a very long way. But I do think I should speak as I find, actually, which is if you look at what National Express has done, and I've heard what Vera said, if you look at what they've done to fares, our fares are the lowest in the country now, apart from London, of course, where we know the subsidy, public subsidy is massive. If you look at the rolling stock they put on the road, it's as good as anywhere in the country. That is capital that they've invested as a private company. Let's just think about this. Just one stat will make you think. What does one of those platinum buses cost? About £460,000. There are over 350 of them in the West Midlands now. You can all do the maths. That's about £160 million. Now, the CA has not got £160 million of capital to invest in that. And that's what we're actually talking about in terms of moving to a public funded piece. And that is exactly the problem that every other area that is thinking about franchising will face in the same way. Now, if you're in Greater Manchester and you have not seen that investment in the fleet, and our very clear commitment here to have the greenest fleet, we're on target for doing that. We're in a good position. But these are some of the really difficult calls. So I do have a considerable respect for the way in which National Express have invested in the networking.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Akhtar and then Councillor Kettle.
Thank you, Chair. In my opinion, there is something fundamentally wrong with our transport strategy in West Midlands. That we are using private operator to run a public service, and we all know that the private businesses always put their profit first than the customer. Do you think it's the right approach, or we need to bring the service back in-house?
Let's just be clear. There are some things that we don't have the choice about. I'm not trying to dodge your question. I'll give you a straight answer to it in a minute, but let's just be clear. At the moment, it is just not on the table for example, West Midlands Trains suddenly to become a public operator of the CA. It is run by a private company in a contract with the government. That's just the situation. So to some extent, it's a very fair question. It's not one that's on the table at the moment. So we've got to make the best of those relationships. And that's why the contract has just been served with them. We've got a collaboration agreement to give real power to the West Midlands Rail Executive, which each council is represented on. And that's the way we try to influence their delivery. The bus situation is different, as that conversation has just been going on. And again, the simple point is this. It is not on the table from government at the moment to have the sort of London style a huge public subsidy that goes into what is effectively a public sector run bus service in London. We've got two options, either this enhanced partnership or the franchising, and I've given you my view about where the challenge of franchising would be. I can see the attraction of it, by the way, of course. We specify a lot more, the routes, the fares, all of that, but it comes with an enormous cost. And so my own view is that we're trying to make the arrangement of an enhanced partnership where there's still a huge role for the public sector to subsidise the unprofitable routes, but then use the private sector to run those routes that are profitable. That is a sensible situation given the choices we have.
Okay, Ian and then Tony.
Thank you, Ken. Andy, when you use the word subsidy, are we using the transport levy, the 114.7 million? So your subsidy comes from that levy?
Again, it's important to draw out the two different subsidies. Where the first type of subsidy that I said always existed for us to, for the unprofitable routes to be subsidised, yes. The second type of subsidy, which the government had put in place directly because of the ridership numbers, no, that comes directly from the Treasury.
Thank you.
Tony?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned franchising and the enormous cost that it would actually take for the combined authority to take that over. I mean, you're talking hundreds of millions of pounds. So I personally don't support that. I don't think we as a combined authority we could afford it, and potentially we may not be able to do it that well. But I think what we can do as a combined authority is to hold these private operators to account and to make sure they do offer good services in the right place at the right cost. So do you believe the combined authority is actually good at doing that, or does it need to improve?
That's correct, Tony. That is our role. And that's what the enhanced partnership is supposed to do. It's supposed to get us round the table with them and look at areas where there is mutual benefit, and it's also through the subsidy mechanism gives us a control over those routes. Do I believe we're good at it? Yes, essentially. Could we be far better? Of course we could. And we do need some solutions in communities like yours, where we haven't got, in rural communities where the usage of public transport is less sparse, we haven't got a good enough answer there. If that's what's behind the question, there's a very categorical answer to that. We've got progress to make.
I agree with that. In the community I live in, you know, we probably have 2 or 3 buses a day, and they don't always go to the right place. Correct. So that needs to be improved.
It does. And that's, of course, why this demand responsive trial that's been done in Coventry is really very interesting, because that would be a solution for the rural areas.
Thank you. Just to finish up on transport questions then, I've got Naeem Akhtar, you've got a question on railways.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You will agree that when it comes to tackle the air quality, food air quality, and increase the productivity in our region, the public transport play a huge role. Correct. When people move around in the region quite frequently. For example, there is no direct link between Coventry and Leicester. Yes. We've got a railway track. Yes. If I have to go to Leicester, I'll come either Birmingham to go to Leicester or from Nuneaton. Coventry in Nuneaton, there is a diesel engine. It's not, the track is not electrified. Correct. So what are you planning to lobby for the electrification of the track and the track which are not being used at the moment to bring them back in service?
Okay. Have you heard of Midlands Connect and Midlands Rail Hub? That's right. Yeah. So, okay. So the straight answer to the question is we are currently with Midlands Connect, because that's a pan-regional body, so it draws Leicester in as well. We are lobbying government hard for announcement in what is called, another bit of jargon, the Integrated Rail Plan, which they will make that announcement very shortly. The headline of it will, of course, be what's happening to the eastern leg of HS2. That's where all the media attention is. But I'm extremely optimistic that within it, there will be a commitment to what we call the Midland Rail Hub, and that will include re-establishing the link between Coventry and Leicester. So that case is being made hard, and we wait to see if we're successful in getting that. We'll also improve services, by the way, Birmingham, Derby, Nottingham, Leicester, and if they decide decide not to go ahead at this point with the eastern leg of HS2, for us in terms of East-West Midlands connectivity, it will be an extremely good substitute.
Can I come back? Also, during the election campaign, you said that you're trying to open up Countdown and Folder Station as well. So can you tell us a bit more about that? So
Yes, I can. So this is an application to a brand. So all the jargon the government uses, I have to use it. This is an application to what they call the Restoring Your Railways programme. We've had success of that. For example, the funding for the Walsall-Wolverhampton line is coming from that. The applications have now gone into that for the stations in Coventry alongside some other ones actually at other parts of the Midlands. So it's in that programme.
Thank you.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. My apologies, I didn't quite catch your eye just before you talked about the rail. I think that's a welcoming question, certainly about from diesel to electrification. That kind of links with the air quality later on. But the interesting thing on the public transport, Andy, what I'm eager to see is, and I'm so pleased to see that different authorities are all coming together, identifying the gaps within their areas to actually strengthen and lengthen the connectivity so people can go from one area quite comfortably where possible. And I'm also looking as well on the, as well as public transport, I'm thinking of helping people with the gaps filling, that they then can choose to go on public transport rather than using their car. But there are people from outside of the areas where they could actually use the park and ride, because I'd like to see park and ride developed more, so they can go the extra, I suppose, the extra couple of miles by public transport. And the other one was on deliveries of goods, particularly with HGVs. And I think, Chair, I think that they call it possibly urban consolidated centres. I think I've heard that word being used, or the last mile. And your thoughts on that particular project and how that, I think it would help tremendously, but it's where they could be located. So at least switching from a large vehicle to a smaller vehicle, rather than bringing these HGVs into places like the city of Birmingham Centre. Thank you, Andy.
So there's two questions in there. The first one, really interesting, on the whole question of the integration of different forms of transport to make your full journey is what you're really talking about. So you get on the train out of the city, you arrive at the peripheral station, and then you come to this question of the last mile bit. So we had this exhibition at Warwick University just a few weeks ago showing the different pieces here, and what we will roll out is what we call a local mobility solution. So I don't know, I'll choose the example that perhaps comes most naturally. Solihull Station, there would be then a provision of bikes, scooters, with the on-demand bus, speaking of what Tony's just said about poor bus services in rural areas, so people can make the full journey. And we're trying to pull all of that together in this local mobility solution. As I say, we showcased at Warwick University there, so that's something we will definitely trial in the next period of pulling all this together. Okay, then on the freight piece, the truthful answer here is this has been talked about a great deal, but we have not yet got a prototype solution to this. It is definitely in our next medium-term transport strategy that we have to get to this. But I'm not going to bluff you, we have not yet got a proposal around that. But the principle that you mentioned is right.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks everybody for the transport related questions. The next block of questions is on housing and land.
Okay.
So I think the first question I've got comes from Councillor Naeem Akhtar from Coventry.
Thank you, Chair. Given the huge shortage of social housing in our region, and a recent report from the LGA warns that by the next year, 2.1 million households will be on the waiting list. I would like to know what financial and political support you can provide to a fast-growing city like Coventry to increase the housing stock in Coventry. Please note that the vast majority of development in Coventry currently take place on brownfield. 94% of all completions since the plan adoption, 92% of all dwelling currently under construction, The only developable brownfield land left for the development is either contaminated or have been identified as employment land. So what support you can give to the Coventry, because you have been trying to be champion of the brownfield first.
Okay.
In Coventry's case, we don't have that much brownfield left.
Okay.
So how you going to support Coventry?
Okay. So let's just move to what's probably the single most important government announcement on this, first of all, which you might or might not have seen.
I've seen it.
The deal with the registered providers. And I think the sum is actually £8.9 billion has just been awarded to registered providers, and West Midlands-based registered providers received a at least fair, if not better than fair, proportion of that. So critically, they have now got the funding for developing their schemes. And of course, what we're doing with them is we have set up a partnership with the group of the 5 biggest developers to look at how we can be accelerating their plans, for example, on some of the sites. That doesn't answer the Coventry question, but I'm still going to say some of the sites in the Black Country. So that mega picture of the RPs moving far more fast than they have in recent years because they've got new funding. It's definitely the big picture. The second big picture piece, which again is not about Coventry, and I'll come to Coventry specifically in 1 second, is of course what we're doing on our total housing funds and our very clear demand that we have at least 20% affordable in that, which I know is not the same as social. And recent data, because I thought you'd be interested in this, we've now moved to an average on our everything that goes through our single commissioning framework of 26% affordable. That's about double what most local authorities achieve. So we are very clearly putting our money where our mouth is and making our development partners address that. Now, in terms of Coventry, the primary brownfield site that we want to support and want to get done is, of course, Abbotsleigh, which I know you know about, and ideally hope, and I hope we're united on this, that we found a way that that can go through planning for that location. You are right that Coventry has a lot less brownfield land than other local authorities, but I don't quite accept there is no more, because what I think is going to happen in Coventry is we're going to have a look at redevelopment of locations. It's more difficult, I accept, and obviously the most exciting redevelopment that will bring considerable housing is the city centre relocation, where of course what we're doing, we're putting £98 million on the table for that, so a huge commitment for Coventry. And I'm excited that the majority of that scheme now is going to be residential led rather than retail led. And what we will also be doing is being frankly available to any developer in Coventry who then does any redevelopment of location, because I think the tough question for Coventry and for Coventry councillors on the planning committee is whether we're going to make the city more dense, probably higher. We've seen that happen in Birmingham. It's been welcomed and it can be demonstrated that it can be done to a really good standard. And that's really the tough question that is coming for Coventry, and we will want to play our part with our funding in that as well. But 2 very big schemes, we're putting cash on the table for Coventry.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you for that, Andy. The problem is that we have seen over the years that developers actually prefer to build the high-rise flats, which are very, not popular in the families. So family would like to live in the houses, but the developer always prefer to build the flats.
Yeah, so this is absolutely correct, and it's really like chicken and egg here. They also prefer to build on greenfield land where they can make more money more quickly.
Yeah.
So you know that underlying this question is the difference between me and Coventry City Council in terms of what's been agreed as the local plan. So we might as well call it out. If you have a local plan that agrees lots of greenbelt development on the west of Coventry, that's where the developers will focus. If you say to them we are not going to do that, then they will be far more determined to do the right thing in the existing urban areas. And it is more difficult, I accept. And the answer isn't just a pinnacle of high rise. It needs more creative redevelopment. But I genuinely feel we could bring the developers to the table more if there wasn't an easier option for them that, lo and behold, they're all choosing to take.
one last time.
But final question, and then I'll bring in Councillor Tricky.
We can debate on this all day long, and
We can, yeah.
you know, but look, the local plan is a legal document. It's not approved by it's approved by your government. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
It's gone through all the stages. We are where we are. My question is about building the flats, which is not popular with the families. So if you get £200 million to a developer in Coventry to build a high-rise flat for the social housing, which is not popular. What I'm trying to say is we've got the family who wants to live in the houses, not in the flats.
Yeah. And what I'm saying to you is that I think you're being, strangely for Coventry, because it's a very ambitious city, I think you're being quite unambitious about what the city centre living could sustain, actually. I think there are development opportunities there to do pieces that will actually take the average value up substantially. No, it does not answer the social housing point, but definitely moves the Coventry housing market on in a way which it hasn't yet happened. And there's a real chance of that. And that can be done in a really sympathetic way of development, which is green, sustainable, all of those things. It's very interesting. The small examples of where that's happened in the city, they have been incredibly popular and prices have been very robust. So my sort of urge to you would be, don't make it easy for the developers to do other things. Force them to the table around that.
Councillor Trickett.
Just a quick comment, and maybe it's something that we need to look at further within scrutiny, that it comes back to the sovereignty of powers. And if you've gone through a huge planning process and it has been agreed by both government and by that constituent authority, as a mayor who espouses to run a collaborative leadership and respect the different boundaries of the different authorities, it just seems strange that you're not working within the planning frameworks that the planning authorities have put out. And it's something that, you know, I'm one of the strange people who actually think that the mayor should have strategic planning powers, but, you know, I'm sure my colleagues don't believe in that. But, you know, I just think we do need to be really mindful.
That's fair. So, okay, I know why you say that, Lisa, and it's fair reflection, but I actually think we are, but I actually don't think that rules out what I thought was a fairly intelligent exchange about what should be happening with the developer, actually. So in principle, I buy what you say, and that's why all the funding that we put on the table is effectively to support the plans that are going forward.
It just comes back to that relationship between the leaders, the mayor, and actually how we broker a shared vision. Can I just come back, because you referenced a housing partnership you put together for the 8.9 billion.
No, we haven't put it together for the 8.9.
Yeah,
That's
no,
government.
sorry, yeah. And you said it was the 5 biggest developments. Yes. I recollect that partnership because we called it in.
You did.
And we haven't as yet seen the business case for it.
That's right, I think.
So it doesn't actually exist at the moment,
well,
or does it? Because there was a real worry, just let me pick up on this, that you responded on the RSL point to the social housing point with your RSLs are there to do that. Regrettably, the vehicle that was being put forward and has continued to appear in the drafts doesn't stress social housing or affordable for rent. It basically it stresses a development vehicle that provides a return. And so my concern is the CA has created a vehicle that actually potentially undermines the very purpose of the grant the government has given for us to deliver on social housing.
So what we should do, because you are right, it was called in and then I think it was agreed at the call-in and the business case was to be presented. I actually don't know if that business case has been presented. I think it was to be presented to the Housing and Landlord. So we will follow that up. That's fair.
Thank you. And this committee is going to be doing a deeper dive into housing and brownfield regeneration as well. So I think the business case for that model would be really helpful in advance of our working group. I've got 2 questions now from Councillor Waters about housing needs and associations.
Hi, Andy. We've actually just touched on what I'm going to ask. We've got a massive housing need in the Black Country and Birmingham, and it's not just for affordable, it's for social. And what's happening is when the pot of money comes down for them to actually access, it's a case of they're actually building, the housing associations and what have you, or councils are actually building affordable housing, which is part rent, part buy. And that means those that are on social housing that can't afford to do that are being sourced out the market, and there's no houses for them to live in. There's a very, very large waiting list around the West Midlands of people that are actually looking to be rehomed.
Yeah, you are clearly right, and there's a very large housing number in the Black Country, full stop, of all types, hence the whole debate about the Black Country plan, where it's going back to a previous question, it's a lovely example of us working with the leaders across the Black Country. Now, what I haven't told you about, which goes straight to your question, Vera, is what got all the stuff about the 8.9 billion coming. What we have also opened negotiations with government for, and this obviously was another feature of the election campaign, and I think frankly the two leading candidates have the same view on this. We've opened negotiations directly for an affordable housing deal with central government, where we would have a sum, like the GLA has the sum, where we would directly control those funds. Now, bid has been put in, and obviously that would give us a huge acceleration on top of what the RPs will do to try to address the need that you. I do not know where that is going to go with government yet, but I am more than happy that that's tracked by you as to the progress that we make. We bid 500 million for a substantial sum. As I say, there's no response on that yet, and it's all about the same point, trying to accelerate the total pace here, and we would be able, obviously, to change the blend types with it.
Can you refresh me on my question? It's my phone. My phone's gone off and it's completely lost it. What's the right? Okay, it's gone. I'm gone. Right. I do apologise. So I've sat there all day. Well, what's the name? And I've actually been looking, and I've been keep on tapping it, and then I go and lose it. Right. Housing associations. What can be done to hold housing associations to account to ensure they deliver social affordable housing?
So they've all, well, the big money and the big action is everything we were previously talking about. And to be really clear, they've had to bid and they've had to say what they will do by when. So the critical issue now is making sure they deliver on those promises. To be fair, the government's done what it needed to do to say here's the cash and it's there. And now it's actually examining that they do fulfil their terms of those investments.
So is it still affordable social, or have they now split up the two and separated affordable from social? Because that is really what needs to be done, because they're actually they've been getting away with doing the affordable buy-to-lets and not producing any social.
And they're also, of course, doing affordable on a national definition, which we've agreed in the region doesn't really bite. So, and when I talk about affordable, I'm talking about our much tougher definition of that. So our 26% number is perhaps even better. I believe, but I would like to confirm this actually, that their bids had to distinguish between the two. But let us make sure that is correct, Vera, so I don't mislead you.
So, because from my knowledge of it, normally when they demolish in like an housing estate, they'll actually build some. They'll give the builder money, incentive to actually have some for sale. Then there's only 25%. Has to be social. The rest can be buy-to-lets.
Yeah, that's right. So, Laura, make sure we follow up that precise question as to the commitments. Can I raise one other thing very, very quickly? The other thing I'd like you to look at some point is our help to own pilot. which of course, I don't know if you're all familiar with. This was a CA collaboration with City of Wolverhampton Council, where at the marches in Wednesfield, I think it was about 120 properties, new scheme where it was basically designed for local key workers to make through a funding mechanism to make it extremely affordable, if that makes sense. It's not social in the true sense, in the normal sense of that, but it is about a very, very affordable scheme that we put together, again, to try to bring a new product to the market. It was done as a pilot. It looks to have been hugely successful. There'll be media about this with the City of Wolverhampton Council on Friday, tomorrow, and I'm hoping it will then come to the board and that other authorities will choose to get behind this with us as well.
Thank you. And I think that the thing for all of us here is that, you know, from Dudley's perspective, we have 3,500 families in need of alternative housing, and that 3,500 families are generally not going to be in a position to either move into any other private rent or onto the home ownership ladder, no matter how creative it is. So I think the focus for me is how we as a region can start to really make sure that we address that need. You know, Dudley is no different to any other authority in the region. Obviously, Birmingham is magnified with the number of families they have in temporary accommodation. So I think for me, I acknowledge that it's driven very much by the government agenda, but in terms of how we respond regionally to our housing needs across our authorities, I think we really have to get a grip on this one. And in terms of the social aspect, we really have to be clear on it.
And so I think I accept that. I think the big picture here is we've got a real grip on the total number of homes being built. There seems to not be any questions about that. We've got a grip on the planning, the plan issues. So we've got soils plan consultation, we've got the Black Country plan about to be. We've had the debate about Coventry, and we've actually got a real grip on the models around affordable. The issue that is there is definitely the social within that. I accept that.
Thank you. Got one further question on housing and land, and that's Councillor Padder.
Hello, Andy. I guess the questions around the high street and regeneration. And my particular question is the bringing the empty buildings back into use. Some of the ones in my ward in Tipton, for example, Owen Street, you may know this very well.
I do.
There's a private landlord that seems to be throttling the businesses, and business seems to be shutting down. And at the best of times, 1 in 5 are open. So what can we do to bring the empty building back into use, and particularly encourage those private landlords to reduce the rent, to encourage more businesses into the area?
This is hard. This is a hard question. So I think the first thing to say is the CA is trying to step into this into a strategic way. And the best example of that is obviously sitting for 5 years now on the cash for the city centre redevelopment in Coventry, which is designed to address this in a really meaningful way. I think that's, frankly, it has to be admired, the way that's been gone about. We've also, of course, supported, in some cases, co-written the application to the government's towns funds, and we've had real success in a number of the key centres, both constituent and non-constituent. It tends to be that country, and the big counties, not Birmingham, Solihull and Cov. But where we're left with a real problem is the smaller high streets like yours. And I've been to see Tipton, which did not get any funding from the Towns Fund, and it probably isn't going to get a major redevelopment from CA Housing and Land Funds. So you come to the dynamics of the market, just as you've said, and it's almost impossible question, because if the private landlord chooses artificially to maintain their rent rather than accepting a lower market rent, and they retain it because they want to keep the asset value in their books the same as they'll accept a cash flow shortage, there is precious little we can do to force that. There is no national legislation that can force that. What of course has been done is there have been business rates, holidays and all of those things to try to make it more viable. But I cannot sit here and say, to the head of your question, I can make the private landlord take a different approach. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. But that doesn't mean we are trying to answer the high street issues in lots of other ways. Their commercial decision that they prefer a vacant unit and maintaining the asset value than having a lower income, which requires them to write it down.
I guess the second part of this, if these centres are closing down, then we're looking at transport, and people are then having to use cars to go somewhere else. And this clean air policy, we're up against it, aren't we?
Of course, and so many of these conversations hang together. Why am I so against greenbelt development in the Black Country? Because actually it prevents the regeneration of local centres. What is least sustainable, least clean transport? It's an edge of town greenbelt development. So again, it all hangs together. So and of course, we're trying to maintain our public transport services to make it easy for people to go into local centres like Tipton, just as we've described. So we can see all of this hanging together, but I just can't sit here and say we will deal with that private owner in that single location, just as many others are the same. I can say our overall policies are trying to drive the sustainability and regeneration of these places.
And I guess there might be something about the private owner seeing that the future of many of their centres is going to be around residential and holding out because they think there might be some money in that for them. And I'm sure that's happening.
And in some places we want to encourage that, where the future of some of the high streets is to condense them and actually have more residential in them. Some of the schemes that we're supporting are doing exactly that. But it doesn't stop the holdout that you're talking about.
Thank you. Okay, so that moves us on then to the final section of our questioning, which is on the environment, and that will be predominantly around air quality. And I think Peter and Lisa will pick this up between them.
Okay.
Do you want to kick off?
If I can kick off. So we've discussed public transport, the importance of actually getting buses and people shifted onto public transport. We all know cars take up far more room than buses. I'm interested in your view on how we take cars off the road, and indeed whether you believe we do need, as a region, to take cars off the road. But where I suppose I'm quite interested is in your powers, and the powers that you have around air quality. And one of the sort of areas I suppose I'm obsessing about a bit at the moment is the amount of HGVs that are still cutting through our city, and I'm speaking as a Birmingham council here, that cut through our city to go and join the motorway, or they bypass Solihull and the motorway and come through Birmingham. And that really affects the pollution rates on our inner ring road. Now, we could happily signpost everyone back off to Solihull, but I'm sure my colleagues in Solihull would be very happy. The M42 was built as a connecting route that you can actually go all the way around the edges of Birmingham and have no need to come through. You have the powers to address air quality within your brief. Are you going to be actually exercising those powers in any shape or form that can address the pollution caused by HGV traffic and generally polluting vehicles coming through Birmingham?
So it's a very timely question because we have limited, as they would be called, concurrent powers with the local authorities. That was what was in the original. But the agreements, again, to this whole point about agreeing with leaders, is that thus far the air quality issues have been addressed by local authorities, not combined authority. With, of course, the very big exception that everything we've talked about encouraging public transport is a CA-led piece. and spent ages talking about if we get more people onto public transport out of their car, that's probably the single most important thing we can do. And of course, actually, everything we do around industrial pollution, everything we do around domestic pollution, also areas where we can, where we are being active. But on the specific of air quality responsibility, the government are about, we believe, to change the landscape through the new Environment Bill, which we're actually expecting to be published next week. And we are expecting, I don't know this for certain, but that will ask CAs, as opposed to LAs, to step up their role. If that is so, we will put a paper to the board where we will seek agreement from everybody that that is what is done. So the answer, straight answer to your question, is I am expecting that to be the case. I do not know that for certain, and I will want to make sure that that is agreed with leaders, because it would be pretty futile if we were to step into something where there was not collaboration with our local authorities. I'm expecting that all to play out over the next few weeks.
Okay, so I totally get the concurrent powers and the agreement. I mean, I can hardly see the leader of Birmingham saying, please allow these HGVs to continue coming through my centre. What I'm interested in, and you and I had a conversation a good few years back about air quality and the importance of the powers being operated at a regional as well as a local level, because you can be the integrating force.
Yeah.
You know, we need to push traffic onto the motorways rather than through our residential areas. So are you confirming you have not used any powers beyond your public transport investment to address air quality within our region?
We have done work around public transport, decarbonisation of industry, and indeed decarbonisation of the home. So all those programmes are in place. Okay? So they are specific examples of where we have acted. If what is behind your question is, has the CA imposed a stick around HGV vehicles in the region? The answer is no. And of course that would have to be an agreement with our local authority partners. I hope that is clear.
I'd just like to be very clear, I wasn't saying stick. I was saying using enabling powers.
But let me just ask Laura then, the first time I've asked Laura, to be really clear what power we have. I do think this is an important point in the exchange here.
Just to be clear, there are no powers that where there's any level of primacy. So they are all concurrent powers. We have no ability through powers to make any changes that aren't agreed at the board. So we don't have the ability to do, I think, what you're asking outside of trying to work through local authorities who are highways authorities for them to enact what they see fit. So with the limitations around us, I think we do as much as we possibly can, but we are limited in what we actually have power to do. If that makes sense.
We may disagree.
Okay, I'm going to have to come to Peter then for the final question. Sorry, Tony, but we've got approximately 3 minutes left of this session.
You're very precise.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andy. Interestingly enough, that seeing research from the University of Birmingham, which I found very encouraging, and it's talking about working with the Birmingham City Council and others looking at air quality, specifically at nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter. Although I'm not a scientist, as what Councillor Trickett was alluding to, actually with air quality, but I see that with the City of Birmingham and many others, of course, slowly but surely, we're moving away from petrol, fossil fuels, moving away from diesel with cars and HGVs. Yes, it is a slow process, but it will obviously inevitably come on. We've talked about the potential of urban consolidation centres, if they can come on board. And actually, when I was looking at the information that came along, Chair, from the university, and it does talk about a number of different areas that over time that they've talked about, actually energy from various buildings, fossil fuels, etc. That's all in the mix. And also from farming, HTVs, as we've mentioned, and many other areas. So, Andy, I think that the question is, I feel that collectively, this is something that we're all in and we've got to do something about. And again, I believe as well that you've got people that can have their cars, hopefully moving on to electric vehicles in time, again with the connectivity to be able to actually say, Lisa, to have the connectivity to have that option and choose and think about themselves and adding to their attitude towards change of the environment and how they use public transport. So I'm wondering how you can encourage, as our mayor, all the sectors that I've mentioned to actually do even more, and we're working again from our environmental board here at the Combined Authority to encourage people to do, well, try to up their game, I guess, is to do their part to help to reduce the air or the carbon emissions that we're getting into the atmosphere, not just in Birmingham, but throughout the West Midlands and the UK as well. Thank you.
So spot. The report I've got in my hand actually, because I thought this might come up and it's very topical. It is a brilliant report. You're right. Lots of money. But this is, and please, I don't want to think we've been doing nothing. All the work that's gone on across transport, across domestic energy, across industrial businesses, that's all part of this. But the critical point that's being drawn out, and there will be a board report shortly, and Councillor Courts, as the chair of the Environment Board, is going to front this, and Councillor Ward has asked for this to come to the board. We'll agree what further role we should be taking. Yes. And I believe that we will be being played into a role formally by the Environment Bill. And that's where this dialogue that went on between Laura and Lisa is important, because thus far we have not been able to drive anything from the CA out with working collaboratively with each local authority. That might change under the bill, where we'll be given a lead responsibility. So we will then, to your question, be able to assess what role we would then wish to play. My view on it is frankly the fact that there are no political boundaries here. This is actually literally blows across the region. Mm-hmm. So we would need to work collaboratively on it. And that's why I'm expecting a board report to come, talking about what we could do, given the resources and authority that we have. And then I would want us all to stand behind that collectively.
Chair, that is excellent news, and I look forward to seeing the reports as well. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. That brings us just after 11:30, and I am aware, Mr. Mayor, you've got a 12 o'clock external meeting.
Well, and I think you've heard enough, frankly. So, thank you. Thank you. Good conversation, actually, and we've got a few follow-ups. But I also think there's some of the big issues we will follow through over the next 3 years, obviously.
Yeah, and obviously, I think sort of as we have more Q&As with you, some of the focus will end up being around the strategy, the corporate strategy, and delivering on the corporate strategy. So I think that will come up in the next ones. But thank you for your time, and
thank you.
We look forward to seeing you for the budget Q&A, which
really
might be a bit more, a bit more challenging.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy your conversation.
Do you want us to stay to the next